to face. In today's little bite-sized conversation, I want to revisit the swimming pool analogy, that the types of student inquiry. And when I created this sketch note almost 10 years ago now, um, I didn't articulate or speak about it or write about it as I do now. Now when I speak about the sketch note, there's so much more depth, there's so much more color, there's so much more experience at schools such as yours that have adopted this swimming pool graphic to guide teaching and learning. And what I want to do is share just a few things that I feel are relevant, helpful, and even, dare I say, a little bit provocative as a bit of a provocation for you to nudge and guide and maybe even shape your planning of learning for your students. And so I suppose if I were to give you a few tips towards the swimming pool graphic that I'd like you to keep in mind. If you have a pen and paper, I'd love for you to write down these tips. Number one thing I often speak to is that it's so important that we embrace planning to four different types of inquiry. When teachers hear the word inquiry, they think of free inquiry, they think of the deep end of the pool. And inquiry is so much more than merely the deep end of the pool. There's structure, there's controlled, there's guided, and there's free. And what we see across these four types is a gradual release of responsibility from the teacher to the scholar. The teacher facilitates learning where slowly over time and through scaffolding and planned experiences, students take on more ownership, more agency over learning. So this progression of agency is something I really would love to lift up across these four types. I'm often asked, is free inquiry the best type of inquiry? And that's certainly not the case. Just to put everyone at ease in the room, if you don't do free, that's okay. But I do want to propose that a hallmark of authentic inquiry in schools such as yours is that we want to see a change of agency over time. We want to see students have more voice, choice, and ownership over the parameters of learning over time. So in some settings, some teachers may adopt all four types across a span of time. In some settings, they may jump from structured to guided. In some settings, they may do structured, controlled, guided, free. The hallmark of successful authentic inquiry is that change of agency over time. So, no matter where you are in your context, in your practice, in your curricular planning, we want to be mindful of using this swimming pool graphic as almost like an overarching map of learning across a school year. And as a map, an overarching map of a learning progression, if you will, across the school year, how are you mindfully planning for more agency over time? So, that's number one. We need to think of these four types, and we need to think of planning for agency, planning for greater voice, choice, and ownership. Number two, I'd like you to consider is, what are the skills that students need to handle, to feel empowered, to be confident and successful and capable in taking on more ownership over time? What do you think the skills are? And don't worry, it's not a pop quiz. I bet you know the skills. You do know the skills. What are the six things that we value at Summerland? What are the six things that we are thinking about, that we not just value, but we take into consideration when we're planning learning across time? It's the six C's. When we look at the swimming pool graphic here, we think about how we're creating conditions for students to feel and have more opportunity to demonstrate creativity, communication, citizenship, critical thinking, excuse me, character, and collaboration. It's these competencies, these deep learning competencies, that students will need to flex over time, need to strengthen, need to experience over time in order to take on more ownership and agency over learning. So that's something I'd love for you to consider in your instructional design, in how you're planning for learning. How are you creating the conditions for your students to flex those six skills? Not just to be more mindful of them, not just to reflect on them, not just to grow through them, but to actually experience more collaboration, more critical thinking, more communication, etc., in the learning experiences that you're planning. So that's number two. Competencies matter, your six C's matter. And as a progression of learning across time with regards to that swimming pool graphic, how are you planning for the six C's across time so your students can take on more ownership over learning? Number three is the notion that deep learning just doesn't happen in the deep end of the pool. I think when teachers look at the swimming pool graphic, the analogy kind of nudges us to consider that the good learning happens in the deep end. And that's just not the case at all, my friends. That the depth of the pool, again, the depth of the pool represents and reflects the depth of the agency students have over the learning. Deep learning can happen in any area of the pool, the shallow end to the deep end. I've seen amazing teachers in the structured end of the pool and in the controlled end of the pool engage and facilitate deep learning for students. It becomes problematic if we're just sitting in the shallow end all year long with our students. It becomes pretty boring and pretty redundant pretty quick for both us and for them. So this deep learning can happen in any area of the pool. The depth of the pool reflects the depth of the agency over time. So that's something for you to consider is as your students are flexing and exercising the 6 C's over time, how could deep learning shift, change with regards to ownership, agency, citizenship over time as well? So deep learning can happen in any area of the pool. The depth of the pool reflects the depth of the agency over the learning. And number four, the last thing I'd love for you to consider is the notion that inquiry isn't a project, inquiry is not a worksheet, inquiry is not an assignment. Inquiry is a stance in which we teach from. Inquiry is how we show up to share learning and learning space with our students, how we empower, how we center the student, and to a certain degree, we decenter ourselves. And again, the skills our students need to take on more ownership over learning as we engage in more deep learning opportunities for them and with them. Sometimes inquiry can show up in a project, sometimes it can show up in a quote unquote presentation, but inquiry is a stance in which we teach from. So your willingness to facilitate a gradual release of responsibility over learning. Your willingness is dependent on you flexing certain dispositions yourselves. We think of deep learning competencies for our students. In my work, there are actually a few inquiry teacher dispositions that inquiry teachers such as yourselves are mindful of, they're reflecting towards, and they're growing towards. And these inquiry teacher dispositions allow us to teach more authentically, more routinely, and more consistently from an inquiry stance. Things like knowing your curriculum really, really well, inside and out, so you can see that there are multiple pathways towards the same destination, that our curriculum is something that's malleable, it's something that's agile. We can mold and sculpt our curriculum given the questions and curiosities our students have about the curriculum. The notion that inquiry teachers are curious ourselves. If we want curious kids, we need curious adults. Schools that engage in authentic inquiry, they're schools of curiosity. They're schools of, teachers as learners asking big questions of their professional practice, and they become learned communities. It's from this curiosity that we advance our teacher practice. And through professional development, such as conversations such as these, we demonstrate for our students that we ourselves are inquirers as well. If we want inquiry for our students, we ourselves need to engage in inquiry kind of experiences. So these inquiry teacher dispositions allows us to show up and teach from an inquiry stance more authentically, more routinely, and more consistently. As you can see, the swimming pool graphic as a reflective kind of guide for us to look at our curriculum through. If we use this blank inquiry sketch note that you see before you now, the notion of we could look at our curriculum and our unit planning through the lens of agency, and what units do we feel are best planned and facilitated from a structured or controlled stance, and what units or curricular standards are best facilitated through a guided or free inquiry stance. Just looking at your curriculum through the lens of its shift of agency over time can be transformational when it comes to embracing the 6 C's and slowly scaffolding your students' experiences to becoming more capable, more competent with regards to the deep learning competencies. So lots for you to think about, lots for you to turn and talk to as you look at the swimming pool graphic and use the blank swimming pool graphic as a bit of a template. And I'm very much, again, friends, looking forward to seeing you in just a few short months, bringing these conversations to you in real time, person to person on campus there. Until then, I hope you're happy, I hope you're healthy, and I hope you're well. Bye for now.